Welcome back, Sebastian here. So, final video before the season 10 of Formula E starts this weekend, and today I'm going to be ranking the season 10 Formula E grid from all the way from 1 to 22. So, starting in 22nd, I think a fairly obvious pick is our rookie Jehan Daruvala. Daruvala coming over from Formula 2, I know he has some testing experience in the Formula E car, but still a very steep learning curve. So I do expect him to be one of the weakest drivers this coming season. Number 21, driving for ERT, is Sergio Sette Camara. For Camara, I think that he's an alright racer. He's had a couple good seasons in the past. But this past season against Dan Ticktum, I think it kind of highlighted his kind of shortcomings in qualifying. Wasn't able to really get those really good qualifying laps in, and he didn't have especially good energy management to be able to make up that massive difference starting from the back of the grid in the races, especially in the ERT. Whereas with his teammate, he was able to qualify really well and then hang on to those positions a bit better. So I've ranked Sette Camara 21st. Number 20, one of the stronger rookies from last season is Sasha Fenestraz. I think for Fenestraz, he showed really excellent qualifying pace this past season, but I think that he still has a long way to go in terms of energy management. I do think that his racecraft could be a bit better. He did have a couple crashes, for example, at Cape Town. Number 19. This might be a bit of a controversial one. If I did this ranking before this past season, Edo Mortara would have been one of the higher drivers on the grid. But his season 9 with last year was so poor that I've kind of decided to put him quite low on this list. Whether he was slow, crashes, or just being plain inconsistent, he didn't have a great year this past year. Really struggled to adapt to the Gen 3 car. Moved to Mahindra for this year, and I don't know if he's going to be able to kind of reclaim that same form that he had in the Gen 2 era, so for that reason I've ranked him 19th. Number 18, very similar vein to Mortara, I've put Oliver Rowland, or Ollie Rowland as some call him. A bit similar to Fenestraz, very strong qualifying pace. We saw him in Gen 2 era get poles out of cars that probably shouldn't have. Got quite a few poles in his debut season as well, but a very aggressive driver who unfortunately tends to get caught up in accidents and crashes through his own fault often. I think on the racecraft aspect, on the energy management side, I do think he's an alright driver, not the best, not the worst either. But I do think that over-aggression, that over-exuberance, I think does get him into trouble quite often, so I've put him 18th. Number 17, another rookie, Jake Hughes. So for Hughes, very similar to Fenestraz, very strong qualifying pace this past year, but did look quite good against his teammate Rene Rast. I think you can make arguments about who is better, Rast or Nato, but I think for that reason I've decided to put Hughes ahead of Fenestraz. Even though they were both rookies this past year. For Hughes, it'll be interesting to see what he can do this year. Of course, second year in the series, so should be a bit stronger, and that those energy management skills should be a bit stronger this year. If he can cut out on some of the mistakes he made last year, that'll be a really good step as well. So moving into the top 16, put Norman Nato. For Nato, he's a bit of a strange driver, can be quite inconsistent. His very first season, Formula E, he basically showed almost nothing until the very end of the season in Berlin, where he got a win, pole and a win, I believe, and then was dropped, and then came back this year. The first half of the season was pretty quiet, but second half was very, very strong. So seems like it takes him a while to adapt to new cars, and is a little bit inconsistent as well. So that's something to watch out for this year. Going over to Andretti, how long will it take him to adjust to the new car? If he can get beyond it right away, I do think he can be a pretty solid driver. But the fact that it takes that long to kind of get acclimated to adjust to a new car is a bit of a worry for me. Number 15, maybe a bit controversial to have him this high, and that's Dan Ticktum. I think the qualifying pace is very excellent, arguably top 10 on the grid. I do think he still needs to improve his wheel-to-wheel racecraft a bit. Gets caught up in a couple incidents here and there over the season. The energy management I think was honestly pretty impressive. We know the ERT isn't the strongest team, and last year, despite the fact that he would have races where he'd start well in the top 10, and he would be able to at least salvage a point or two out of it, which in a car that's that weak, and given how easy it was to overtake at most circuits last year, was definitely easier said than done. Number 14, one of the breakout stars I think from last year was Nico Müller. A very strong year, had some very strong performances towards the end of the season, and did quite a bit better than his teammate Robin Fines, who is not on the board yet. For Müller, I think the qualifying speed was honestly pretty impressive last year, and he generally was a pretty well-rounded driver. You can have a really hard test this coming year in a car that again shouldn't be too strong, with a very tough teammate in Lucas di Grassi. Number 13. Bit of a shame, I think, to have this driver this low on the list, but I'm going with Sam Bird. For Bird, he's a driver who we know the highs can be so high and the lows, but the lows unfortunately are so low. Crashing Mitch Evans out, Mitch Evans, his teammate last year, out twice last year. He's had this over his entire career. I think, watching back old races as well, he'll have races where he just unfortunately is completely nowhere and crashes out, but he'll have races where he's amazing and he's the best driver on track. I think that inconsistency is really hurts him, or really hurts him overall in this ranking. And as he gets older, he's not that young anymore. Unfortunately, those really amazing days are farther and fewer between. So for those reasons, I've ranked Bird 13th. Number 12, Season 7 champion, Nyck de Vries. So for de Vries, while you would expect for a champion he would be ranked up near the top, I think anyone who watched that season formally knew that he was very fortunate to win the championship the way he did. I'm not going to go over it now because that basically could be an entire video in and of itself. But when we went to season 8 with a much more meritocratic, a qualifying format that was based on merit, instead of kind of the lottery that we had, he was much slower than his teammate Van Doren. I think his qualifying speed is probably his strongest asset. I do think his race pace is a little bit weaker, and his racecraft as well is something that he could still work on. I was reading an article today that said that he had the lowest amount of testing time from the test because of the fire, and I think they got a makeup session, but unfortunately it was rained out. So he probably has one of the lowest amounts of experience of anyone here with the Gen 3 car, aside from Daruvala. So it'll be really interesting to see how he gets on this year. Number 11, Max Günther. So for Günther, I think quite similar to Bird, he's a guy who can have really high highs and really low lows. We saw in Jakarta, he was one of the best. He was arguably the best driver that weekend. But we also saw other parts of the year he would get crashed, get into incidents. And he's also had years where he's just like nowhere, like that one year he was at Nissan, for example. So it'll be really interesting to see how he progresses this year. If he has another really strong year, if I make this list again next year before the start of the season, I think he would be quite a bit higher. But I'm a little bit apprehensive about Günther because he's had these moments where he'll have a half season where he's very strong, and then he'll have another half season where he's not particularly strong at all. So a very inconsistent driver, so it'll be interesting to see if this is the year we finally see a full season of strong races from Günther. Number 10, moving into the top 10, and at 10th I've gone with Sebastian Buemi. For Buemi, I don't think he's quite as strong as the driver he used to be when he was younger. That being said, qualifying is still a strength of his. He showed last year, was able to get a pole position. So I think the qualifying pace is good. I think it's just for the energy management side, he's just not quite as strong as he was in Gen 1. And I think, there was always that gap to Cassidy throughout the year. That being said, he was very consistent last year. I do think that he's going to be hoping for more of the same and maybe try to eke out a little bit more pace a little bit better energy management this coming year. Number 9, Season 8 champion, Stoffel Vandoorne. So for Vandoorne, again, a bit odd to see a champion that low, especially one so recent. But for Vandoorne, I think he really struggled to adjust to the Gen 3 cars. And I think having such a strong teammate in Jeb, I think also showed that perhaps the Mercedes in Gen 2 is a much stronger car than we thought. And it really kind of carried, Vandoorne and De Vries to those championships. That being said, for Vandoorne, very, very strong qualifier, a bit similar to Buemi. I do think he needs to work on the energy management with the Gen 3 car a little bit more, and hopefully that consistency can come and he can get, podiums and wins again this year. We saw in Gen 8, in Season 8, he can be very, very consistent when he's happy and comfortable with the car. So I think for him, just making sure that he can get back to that form that he had in later years of Gen 2, I think would be a big boost for him. Number 8, Robin Frijns. Now, it's a bit odd. I think most drivers are ahead of their team. The drivers that beat their teammates last year are ahead of them on this list. Frijns is one of the exceptions. Have his teammate Muller down in 14th. For Frijns, obviously last year was a bit of a train wreck with wrist injuries, so that's why I'm kind of being a lot more apprehensive about taking that teammate head-to-head matchup at face value. We know Frijns is a very strong driver, did very well against Bird when he was in Virgin and Vision, again did very well against Nick Cassidy. So we know Frijns is a very good driver, I think a very well-rounded driver, good qualifier, good racer, really good on energy management as well. So we'll see. I'm really curious to see how he does this year. But for now, I put him 8th. Number 7, Lucas Di Grassi. For Di Grassi, I think despite the fact that he's kind of been he spent last year trundling around the back of the grid, I still think he's a really strong driver. The energy management, the racecraft have always been his strengths, and I still think that for those two things, he's one of the strongest drivers in the field. We know the qualifying has never been a strength of his. He only has 4 poles in his entire career. And I think, being matched up against Roberto Merhi for half a season kind of was a free pass. It wasn't really a representative matchup for him. Of course, he was better than Roland. And I think, again, this year against Muller, that'll be a good test. I don't think he'll really be competing for, wins or even podiums this year. But I think, if he can get really solid points, I think that'll be a good year for Di Grassi. Number 6, moving into the top 6, and this is kind of, I think, top 6 was quite difficult for me. But at number 6, I decided to go with Antonio Felix da Costa. For da Costa, we know he can be a very strong driver, a very strong qualifier, very strong in the race, but a little bit of inconsistency. He'll have off weekends where he's just not quite on form. But then he'll have other weekends where he's excellent and he'll be the best driver on track. I think last year he took a bit of time to get up to speed with the Gen 3 car, which unfortunately cost him any kind of real championship aspirations. But this year I think with a year embedded in the Porsche team, he's going to be looking to kind of come out guns blazing from the very first race. Number 5, Pascal Wehrlein. So I think it was very close between the two teammates. I felt like Wehrlein, despite the fact that they kind of ended the season on very similar notes, I decided to put Wehrlein ahead because I do feel like he was able to reach those heights this past season more often than da Costa. Of course, Wehrlein got the 3 wins, the 2 in Diriyah, and then the additional win in Jakarta. That being said, I think for Wehrlein, he does have moments where he's, makes some mistakes, like when he made his mistake in Cape Town. He had some off weekends here and there, which I think really derailed his championship. I think for Wehrlein, he's going to be wanting to try to limit those mistakes, limit those off weekends as much as possible, and try to consistently get those top 3, top 4 positions every single weekend. But again, very, very strong season for Wehrlein. If he hadn't had that stronger season, I probably would have put him in the 7th to 12th range. Good driver, but this past season was very, very strong from him. All right, moving up, number 4, Cassidy. So for Cassidy, this past season was a breakout season for him. 4 wins, very strong in qualifying. Actually, the qualifying was not that strong. His qualifying was much better, I think, in the year before. But this year, in season 9, last year in season 9, the energy management, the race pace were very, very strong. He was able to start from 9th, 10th on the grid, make his way to the front and control the race very well. I think if he had been able to qualify a bit better, it would have made any kind of championship hopes much easier. And I think that's something that he's going to be wanting to work on this year. Number 3, Mitch Evans. So I think between Evans and Cassidy, very, very similar, based on the fact that he finished so close in the championship last year. Cassidy was the one finishing ahead. Of course, same powertrain. I think Evans did have a little bit worse luck that year. And I think the other thing with Evans is that he's kind of shown that he can operate on that consistently high level. He's done that for, operate on that level for so many seasons now. I think it makes more sense to put Evans ahead versus Cassidy, who's basically had one excellent year. And it's really on Cassidy to show that he can do that year after year after year, which is really what separates the elite drivers from the very good drivers. Number 2, John Eric Verne. I barely talked about Evans there, but yeah. Anyway, for Jev, very, very strong driver, very strong qualifier, excellent in the races. He's very well-rounded. I think last year he didn't really have the car to compete for the championship. But this year, hopefully, they'll get a little bit closer. I'm not too optimistic about them getting right to the front, but you never know. And if that's the case, I think Jev will be a very formidable opponent for the other drivers at the front of the grid. I'll just finish off with a little bit about Evans. For Evans, I think, excellent qualifier, a very well-rounded driver, and he's been performing on such a good level basically ever since the start of the Gen 2 era. So that's almost 5 seasons now. Of course, number 1 makes a lot of sense. Oh dear, that's not how you spell Dennis. Your season 9 champion, Jake Dennis. Even though a bit strange to put your champion, it's quite natural actually to put your champion at number 1. And I do think in Dennis's case, he was the best driver last season. And he had 2 very, very strong years the year before, of course, almost winning the title in his rookie season. Last year, the year after, season 8, the car wasn't really there, so you can't really blame him for not being able to get those excellent results. Last year, extremely consistent, very good in qualifying. I think got a lot out of the car in qualifying, where the other Porsche drivers, for example, or even the Jaguar drivers weren't able to do that so consistently from weekend to weekend. But for Dennis, he was able to qualify very, very strongly almost every weekend, which really helped him. And I think the race pace especially was very, very strong, and that was really the backbone of his championship win. So for those reasons, I think he's probably the best driver in Formula E at the moment. So there you go. That's my ranking of the 2023-2024 Season 10 Formula E grid. Of course, very excited for the E-Prix this coming weekend. Of course, I'll be doing a review for the race, and I'll be doing my power rankings afterwards. So I guess you can kind of consider this, a week 0 or a pre-season power rankings. Anyway, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.